Good afternoon, colleagues. Could I maybe ask for everybody in the room to take their seats, because we'll begin in a few seconds. And welcome also to our colleagues that are online joining us from the region. So good afternoon again, Excellencies, honored guests, and dear colleagues. Please allow me to welcome you to our launch event today on promoting alternatives to immigration detention in the Asia-Pacific region. My name is Pia Oberoi. I'm a senior advisor on migration and human rights at the UN Human Rights Office. And on behalf of my office and the Regional Network on Migration, I'm delighted that you are able to join us both here in Bangkok and online across the region. The UN Migration Network has been set up at country level, regionally and globally, in order to support member states and stakeholders to fully implement the Global Compact for safe, orderly and regular migration, and we'll hear more about the Global Compact from our speakers today. It was, as you know, adopted in 2018, and we've held both a regional review as well as the first cycle of the International Migration Review Forum earlier this year. And it really represents a common approach to the governance of international migration based in the UN Charter and rooted in the principles and standards of international law. It has a 360-degree vision, providing guidance and actionable commitments. And of particular importance to the subject of this meeting, it has one objective, Objective 13, which commits states to use migration detention only as a measure of last resort and to work towards alternatives, to prioritize non-custodial alternatives in line with international law, and to take a human rights-based approach to any immigration detention. So in line with this commitment and premised on the guidance of international human rights law, the UN Human Rights Office is of the view that any discussion of immigration detention should begin not with detention, but really with its opposite, the fundamental human right to liberty. Article 9 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights guides us that everyone has this right, the right to liberty and security of person, regardless of their migration status, regardless of their reasons for migrating, or indeed how and why they have moved. Simply put, international human rights best practice is clear that migration, even when it is unauthorized, should not be considered a criminal act. Administrative rather than criminal penalties should apply to migrants who cross borders or stay in a country without the correct documents or irregularly. This guidance is not and should not be seen as interfering with the sovereignty of states to control their borders. Indeed, the guidance seeks rather to advise on how such control may be best carried out in ways that protect the rights of all, and in full recognition that migrants who cross borders irregularly to seek work or reunite with family, to escape violence, persecution, conflict, or environmental threat are not criminals. Our call, therefore, to member states is to reconsider migration management policies of criminalization on which immigration detention regimes are based, noting in this regard the stigmatizing effect of criminalizing irregular migration, giving the message that migrants are criminals, when this is most often simply not true. It is noteworthy in this context that within the GCM Objective 13, states have agreed that immigration detention should not be promoted as a deterrent in accordance with international human rights law. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN human rights system has recently developed fulsome guidance concerning immigration detention. In September 2021, the Committee on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families adopted General Comment number 5 on migrants' rights to liberty, freedom from arbitrary detention, and their connection with other human rights. This General Comment clarifies the scope of the prohibition of arbitrary detention in the context of migration and provides direction on the development, implementation, and monitoring of alternative to detention. And we will hear later this afternoon from the committee. Other human rights mechanisms have also issued relevant guiding documents, including the joint general comment by the CMW and the Committee on the Rights of the Child on states' obligations regarding the human rights of children in the context of international migration, with the clear guidance that such detention is never in a child's best interest and must always be avoided. At the sub-regional level, the ASEAN Declaration on the Rights of Children in the context of migration was adopted in 2019, in which ASEAN states agreed to develop alternatives to immigration detention in order to promote the best interests of the child and reaffirm their commitment to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Under the human right to liberty, alternatives to detention are thus a requirement. They are not an optional extra, to ensure that detention is indeed framed and used as a last resort. States are called on to consider less intrusive alternatives to detention or migration that can achieve the same migration management purposes. In the Asia-Pacific region, we know that there are promising practices in regard to the development and implementation of alternatives to detention, as well as continuing challenges. And it is this complex reality that we have sought to reflect in the report that will be presented to you later by the International Detention Coalition, entitled Immigration Detention and Alternatives to Detention in the Asia-Pacific region. It is our hope that the report may serve as a useful resource for the region to learn about and scale up the implementation of human rights alternatives to such detention in line with the commitment and the vision of the Global Compact for Migration. Ladies and gentlemen, in the Progress Declaration negotiated by member states at the International Migration Review Forum in May this year, there was frank recognition of the practical challenges faced in ensuring alternatives to detention with full respect for human rights, particularly with regard to providing adequate living conditions and access to gender-responsive and people-centered services for migrants. Member states also recommitted to working to end the practice of child detention in the context of international migration. As we move towards the next cycle of the regional reviews of the GCM, which we will hear about later and which will take place in 2024, we at the UN Human Rights Office, together with our sister agencies in the UN Regional Network on Migration, stand ready to provide our full support to efforts to end the criminalization of irregular migration in the region, to ensure that immigration detention is always a last resort, to bring an end to child detention, and to implement rights-based, community-based alternatives to detention throughout the region. Together with the champion countries of the GCM from our region, with our stakeholder partners in civil society, national human rights institutions, and others, we look forward to fulfilling the promise of the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration where it is most meaningful, on the ground and in the lives of migrants. I thank you for your attention and would like now to give the floor to our distinguished experts who will join us from various perspectives, and I will introduce them as they speak. First, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hayat Akbari, who is the project manager at Host International, to speak about his lived experiences and the lessons to learn from such experiences. Hayat, please join me at the podium.
Thanks, Pia. Also, before I speak, I want to take this opportunity to thank particularly the UN Migration Network, the IDC, and also the government of Sweden, and everyone else that made this event possible, which is most importantly. One thing I think one lesson that we have learned from the COVID-19 pandemic is staying in a home, not having the right to go outside, particularly in some countries where there was more restriction on movement and going out and how long or how often you can go, that it can have an impact on you directly or indirectly. It can have impact on your mental health, your physical, and so on and so forth. And that was me. That was me when I was at the age of 17, I was detained for over 1 year in a place with in a place where you're locked for 1 year without the right to go to outside, and the biggest wish or hope that you have is to move or to go out for 5 minutes. And that didn't happen up until 1 year when I was released to a community-based detention center. let me tell you the impact of that 1 year of being detained in detention center. When I was finally resettled to a home country, I had to visit and see counselor, because the 1 year detention that I had experienced, it has severely impacted my mental and also psychological. I couldn't focus my studies. I couldn't focus or do the normal things I wanted to do, and that was because of the impact of the detention center that I was detained. And there are organizations such as IDC and other organizations who are working to make this or to end this child detention center. And I think the core of this advocacy and the core of this milestone is involving people who have been detained or who have lived that life. And that's how, that is more, I think it's important that we all involve the people who have lived the life and who are the people who can contribute more. I think it's important that we don't only work for people, but work for people. It's important that we stand and work with people, not just tokenistic participation. Let's just end this and let's just involve the people and the great work that we all are doing together. And one of the examples is here, the people who are involved, the people who have been working for years and years to end child detention center. And don't get me wrong, that there are countries, and you can see more in the report when Carolina is going to talk about, there are champion countries who are doing great. They are doing their best to end child detention center, whether that's any part of the world, particularly the Asia Pacific. So I think one of the important points that I want to talk today is people who are living uncertain life in different parts of the world. And that is not being able to go back to the home country and being detained for many, many years. Some have been detained in different parts of the world for over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. That can't be a solution for them, because the 10 years, some of them were born and raised, and also they got married in detention center. We know the examples, and we have heard about this stuff as well. But that's putting them in detention just because they can't go back home, just because there is the war and everything else that because of those reasons they can't go back. It's not the solution for them it's not the solution to put them in detention center. And instead, there are many, many alternatives. One of the example would be community-based community-based detention. And that was something that when I was released from detention center, that was way, way better. At least I could move, at least I could go out. But the year of experience the year that I was put in detention center, it cost. I mean, let's be frank, that will cost way more money for all the government, for all the organizations. They spend money. But a community-based detention, less cost and less impact on the people mental health, people psychological, and also the family. Because putting people in detention not just impact this person individually, but it will also impact directly, indirectly to the family as well. So the impact could be a long, and also it could be impact the family and also their behavior. So my recommendation from personally someone who lived this life are to have a community-based and a right-based detention or solution. And also the other more important thing is when putting people in detention center, they are in some parts of the world, they are living in a poor and also with a very poor sanity as well. And I mean, again, I'm reflecting back on my own personal experience. When I was detained, where we're detained in a place with 40 people in a very small room with 40 people with 2 bathrooms. You can imagine like the impact, and also live the psychological impact, but sanity, the health, because putting in a person or putting 40 people in one room without thinking that the age, and also, I mean, age is important, because when I was detained, we were put in one block with 40 people with 2 bathrooms, and people were like 16 and 17, and people were like 18. I mean, this is we can do better than this. And again, just to conclude, I want to say that we are doing, I mean, from the experience that I have lived, the countries and also organizations have done, and also we're doing better. But where there's a long way to go. There are solutions, there are alternatives to the detention center, and we can do better than this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayat. And I think it's so important that you bring that experience with you, and that whatever change we seek to make is based on the experience that you have. And so unfortunately, so many people have of living the detention regimes. And now I'd like to welcome to the podium Ms. Carolina Gotardo, who is the Executive Director of the International Detention Coalition. And to take us really through, well, the main reasons that we're here today is to learn more about this report that Carolina and her colleagues were so instrumental in putting together. And I'd really, I'd commend you to read the report, particularly after we hear from Carolina, because it's a wonderful piece of work and really provides us, I think, some direction in which we can take this conversation. Carolina, please.
Thank you, Pia, and hello to everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. So good afternoon to everyone, and good morning to those that are joining us online, or good evening, depending on where people are. It's actually a pleasure to be able to launch the report in the region. This has been actually a joint effort. It's a report that was done in partnership between the UN Regional Network on Migration and the Global Network and IDC. And there was so much work put into it from different teams and also from civil society. So I also believe it's a very good piece, and yeah, hope I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but I think the best way is for everyone to try to read it and to look at the country profiles as well. And basically, I think Pia mentioned this before, this idea came because we were preparing for the International Migration Review Forum, so that took place in May this year. And there was this idea about looking at Objective 13 and what was happening in the region in preparation for the IMRF, but also in a way that will provide us with some evidence base about how we can have this data and how we can do more advocacy in the Asia Pacific region. So that's where the idea came from, and then the different, I mean, OECHR actually helped supporting this report, and the other UN agencies came together, and this is the way we started. So the research covers 19 countries in the Asia Pacific region. It goes into quite a lot of detail, and it goes into the different sub-regions of the Asia Pacific region. So it looks at East and yes, you can see that's the cover of the report. You can see we have East and Northeast Asia. So there we have Hong Kong, the Republic of Korea, and Japan. We have Southeast Asia, so we have Malaysia and Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, and the Philippines. South and Southwest Asia, so Bangladesh, India, Maldives, Pakistan, and Turkey. And we have North and Central Asia. And there the profiles are for Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan. And we did a lot of thinking about how to select the countries to see what was going on, and also where there could be something happening in terms of promising practices, but also what was the detention situation in those countries. So what the report analyzes is an overview of the trends across the whole region, and we have the country profiles and then the regional report. So these are two parts of it. And this is about what are the trends with regards to immigration detention itself, including legal and policy frameworks that enable or that restrict the use of immigration detention. And then also the laws, policies, and practices surrounding the use of alternatives to detention. And look at where there were some promising practices. And we actually call it promising practice rather than best practice, because I mean, I think we have all been saying it, there is a way to go. Like the fact that there are some things happening doesn't mean that, I mean, there is still a way to advance. We also were looking at an analysis of the child sensitive and gender responsive, that type of analysis in terms of these practices or what it was lacking. And the change in laws and policies and practices and the lesson learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, because there were a number of changes in different countries in the region. And I think Hayat mentioned that. So I will never make justice to the report. It's actually very thorough. So I will summarize some of the key findings and some of the key recommendations through the presentation. So in terms of the kind of main findings, one of them is that across the Asia Pacific region, there is widespread use of arbitrary immigration detention. And many countries use immigration detention as a de facto measure rather than an exception. And there is also a lack of regular and comprehensive screening and assessment of individual vulnerabilities. Another trend is that, I mean, we know that this region hosts a quite complex and mixed populations. And there is a lot of people in the different diversity and intersectionality affected by immigration detention. And this number of the diversity of people continue to be staggering. So we were looking at different populations. We were looking at migrant workers, refugees, people seeking asylum, survivors of trafficking, undocumented migrants, etc. So this is a very specific region that way. The region has actually some of the highest numbers of some of these populations. In terms of the law, and immigration detention can be used indefinitely in some countries in the region for migrants that are facing, for instance, removal or deportation orders, or for very prolonged periods of time for those that are waiting for the resolution of their cases. And there is also, in many countries, a limited recourse to challenge detention decisions before a court or independently. I think Pia said this before, irregular migration in many countries is treated more as a criminal offense than as an administrative issue, which is that's a kind of concerning trend. And this means that people found to be in breach of immigration laws can be imprisoned in some countries, can be fined, and in other countries can be even subject to wiping. That happens in some countries in the region. From the intersectionality point of view, it's obviously very important to see what is the impact of immigration detention on different people, because immigration detention affects people in their identities, in their multiple identities and their diversity. So we were looking at that, and there was little evidence that many authorities were considering these issues specifically under those lenses. And when thinking about gender responsiveness, they are generally lacking on this area. So in those countries, for instance, the detention of women, of a specific groups of women is prohibited, for example, limited to, for instance, pregnant women, or where they are having young children. But I mean, in general, there is not a gender responsive approach that we could generalize. And even with ATD, when ATD references women, it references women from from that lens of vulnerability rather than from a lens of agency. So that's something else we found. But not everything is negative. Actually, like Pia was saying before, there are a number of promising practices on some positive developments in the region that are quite encouraging. So for instance, the research found that ATD, or alternatives to detention, is provided in law, or in policy in some countries in the region. And this is particularly for people in situation of vulnerability or who are seeking humanitarian protection. These practices are not necessarily referred or called alternatives to detention, but they are alternatives to detention, even if they are not necessarily called this way. And they allow migrants who would otherwise have been at risk of immigration detention to live in the community, and in some instances also provide access to rights and services. I mean, a very good example is regularization or amnesty programs in different countries in the region that have been used, allowing individuals that would be at risk of detention to regularize their status. There are also examples of countries that facilitate access to legal identity and to certain forms of temporary protection status while the cases are being resolved, and examples of temporary status leading to more permanent status or pathways for more long-term visas in different countries. I think one of the biggest momentum in the region is in terms of the issue of child immigration detention. There has been quite a lot of development in this area, and in terms of ending child immigration detention and the development of community-based ATDs for children and for their families. So several countries in the region either do not detain children in practice or have introduced laws and policies to prohibit or to restrict the use of immigration detention. And for example, I think Pia mentioned this, ASEAN member states have adopted this ASEAN Declaration on the rights of children in the context of migration. And there has been an agreement to promote the best interests of the child and to develop alternatives to detention. There is also, and this is also an interesting trend, there is also more willingness to implement what is a whole of government and a whole of society approach. So much more connection in some countries in between different ministries, government ministries, towards advancing this agenda, and also more work with civil society and with UN agencies together to try to move forward in this way, and to try to think about community-based alternatives to detention that are moving away from the use of immigration detention as a default measure. And for instance, also trends in terms of sharing successes or learnings in terms of peer learning initiatives that are happening in the region. For instance, there is a regional peer learning platform and a program on alternatives to detention that covers 5 countries in the region. And this is also connected with global efforts in terms of trying to create a community of practice that works in terms of alternatives to detention with some UN agencies and civil society involved in these efforts. And finally, in terms of the findings is the COVID-19 pandemic. So we saw in the region that there was some movement with the COVID-19 pandemic, and there were actually some releases from immigration detention in different countries across the region. There were several examples. Some are more promising than others, but also one of the other trends is that in some countries where there were releases in the region, this didn't necessarily lead to supporting mechanisms so people could access rights and services in the community. But what is interesting about the developments in the COVID-19 pandemic is to also think that it's possible to do this if there are different mechanisms enabling it, but we need to think further about community alternatives with proper accesses to services and to rights. So thinking about moving forward and the recommendations, the report suggests some concrete recommendations. And again, I can never make justice to all the recommendations on the report, so I'm going to just summarize this in a few recommendations. So, I mean, the first one, and it's not surprising, child immigration detention is really out of the cards. Child immigration detention needs to end. There is no case for child immigration detention. It's never in the best interest of the child. And it's very good to see that there is momentum in this region towards that. I think what we need to do is to work on this momentum and to leave no doubt that child immigration detention needs to end, and to encourage the countries that are working, and I'm looking at our next speaker from Thailand because there have been a lot of progress here in terms of ending child immigration detention. And the issue of thinking about mainstreaming, ensuring that children are in child protection systems, that they are mainstream into this child protection system. So the whole idea of institutionalized care, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about community alternatives to detention, and institutionalized care should always be a measure of last resort. Like we're talking about children and families living in the community, and the primacy of the right to family life and to family unit. Secondly, and this goes into this issue of intersectionality, we need to recognize these diverse identities of people affected by immigration detention and the intersecting identities of people on the move. And this means that we need approaches that are intersectional, and we need to think about gender sensitive, gender responsive approaches as well. And this issue about supporting the agency of migrant women and girls and gender diverse people, that's very important. Thirdly, there are already, I just mentioned before, there are some existing measures in laws and policies in the region that are promising and that could be used to place people in the community instead of thinking about immigration detention as the main measure that will be implemented. But these measures are underutilized in the region. So we need to change that balance and ensure that these are the measures that are used as first resort and not secondary thought, because they are there. So we just need to build on that momentum and ensure that we build into this idea of community-based alternatives to detention that are not restricting the freedom of movement in any way. And this is the way we can ensure that alternatives to detention are beneficial for migrants and also for governments. I mean, this could be a win-win if it's done in the right way. But we need to think about these alternatives to detention to be engagement-based rather than control-based. It needs to come from the engagement. And I have 1 minute, I know, but I'm going to finish on time, so that's good. So yes, migrants need to be able to be supported in the community and without any restriction to the freedom of movement. And fourthly, is the issue of data, because immigration detention by definition is a very opaque and untransparent area. And in the region, there is not a lot of data that is transparent in terms of the management of immigration detention systems. So there needs to be much better data in terms of what is happening around this area, and investing in data collection and analysis of reliable data that is disaggregated, for instance, by sex or age, sexual orientation, disability, migration status, etc. But again, a word of caution, and is that this data should not be used for punitive purposes. I mean, that's where the balance lies. So finally, I think we need to think about grounding and impact, and Hyatt started really well with this grounding. Because when thinking about this momentum in terms of reducing and ending immigration detention, we need to firstly always think about the people affected by these policies. And the people affected by these policies need to be at the forefront of all the advocacy efforts. And I mean, I love this quote. This brings to my mind this quote of a person affected by immigration detention. And this person said that to end detention, we will need the same perseverance and determinations as those who have survived detention. And I find that super inspiring. And I think this is the way we need to construct this movement and continue with this movement with our own perseverance and determination, and with that inspiration there. So I thank you very much for listening to me. I mean, as I say, this doesn't make any justice, so I encourage you to read this report and to read the country profiles that are quite detailed when it comes to that. There is a lot of information there. And what we hoped is that this could be used as a way in terms of evidence to build the advocacy and to progress towards this movement, towards reducing and ending immigration detention in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. Before finishing, I just want to, my colleague Minja Mada is here and Vivian Chu, I want to thank them specifically for all the work that they did on this report, also to Pia that actually made this possible happening, and to the whole UN regional migration network, and also many of you that helped with the country profiles are here. I mean, there was so much going on in terms of civil society engagement, and also the UN country offices, etc. So many people were part of this. So I want to say thank you to so many of you that contributed to the report. We think it's a great product, and we hope that you're all able to use it in advocacy efforts. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Carolina. And indeed, I think that this was very much a joint effort. And what was really important, I think, is establishing that evidence base and establishing that sense that it's a complex reality. There's a need to understand why vulnerability is something that we put at the front and center of our migration governance, as the GCM tells us to, and how, the various trends tell us that things are possible. So the screen is open here because we're going to welcome next to speak Dr. Jasminka Jumur, who is the Vice Chair of the Committee on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. She is going to be joining us online. And while we get the connection up, I would also encourage those of you that are here with us in the room to take a copy, maybe on your way out, of the general comment that she will be speaking to, because it is whether or not you come from a context that has ratified the Migrant Workers Convention, it is a really important normative piece of work that speaks to how human rights law can understand the whole context of immigration detention, as well as the possibilities of alternatives. I would hand over the floor then to Ms. Jumur.
Thank you so much. I'm able to speak, but I have problem that you see me because there is remark that I'm not able to start video because the host has stopped it. And I ask your technicians to allow me, but never mind, I'm able to speak.
Dr. Jumur, if you wouldn't, if you're comfortable with that, if you want to start, we will continue to work on your video.
Okay, thank you so much. There is no problem, I will start. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the organizers of the event promoting alternatives to immigration detention in the Asia-Pacific region to invite me today to address you on behalf of the Committee on Protection of Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. I would like to remind all of us that the committee is the body of independent experts established in accordance with the Convention on Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, with the main mandate to review the application of the Convention by state parties. Migrant workers and their families often experience marginalization, xenophobia, and poor living and working conditions. In serious cases, they suffer exploitation, expulsion, and risk to life. The convention is a legal binding document that establishes, yes?
I think you might be able to put your video on now. If you could just try one more.
Do you see me? Do you see me?
We do now. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we can continue. The convention is a legal binding document that establishes the rights of migrant workers and members of their families, as well as equal conditions for work of migrant workers and the state parties and nationals. Ratification of the convention obliges states to ensure its implementation. In Article 16, Paragraph 4 Convention prescribes that migrant workers and members of their families shall not be subjected individually or collectively to arbitrary arrest or detention. They shall not be deprived of their liberty except on such grounds in accordance with such procedures as are established by the law. In December 2018, UN member states adopted the Global Compact for Safety, Orderly, and Regular Migration, GCM, as the first intergovernmental framework prepared under the sponsorship of the UN to cover all dimensions of the international migration holistically and comprehensively. I know that many people have doubted what is the relation between the convention and the GCM, and I will speak on that later. But the main issue is that the GSM is not legal binding document. It is cooperative framework that builds on the commitments agreed upon by the member states to the New York Declaration. But GCM also confirmed that all migrants, regardless of their immigration status, are entitled to full respect, protection, and fulfillment of their human rights, and urge GSM states and other stakeholders to take concrete measures to ensure that migrants can access and enjoy those rights in practice. A special focus is placed on ensuring the human rights of migrants who face situations of vulnerability. In the Objective 13 of GCM, there is obligation that states use migration detention only as a measure of last resort and work towards alternatives. States also committed to ensure the processes, not arbitrariness, lawfulness, necessity, proportionality, and most important, individual assessments for any immigration detention, which is limited for the shortest possible period of time, regardless of the places of detention, to the fact that detention has numerous effects on the health and personal integrity of migrants. Therefore, international law and human rights-based approach should be respected to any immigration detention. On the other side, the experience of the Committee on Migrant Workers showed that there is lack of respect to international standards, including convention related to the detention of migrants. Committee has consistently made recommendations in its concluding observations to state parties on issues affecting the right of migrant workers and members of their families who are deprived of their liberty. States parties have obligation not to criminalize migration. The criminalization of migration is exactly often based on political strategies seeking to deter irregular migration rather than a commitment to upholding the rights of migrants. This was the reason why my committee adopted the general comment number 5 on the migrants' rights to liberty, freedom from arbitrary detention and their connection with other human rights in September 2021, but made based on very, very broad consultations. Ladies and gentlemen, the general comment presents authoritative interpretation of the convention and clarifying the scope of prohibition of arbitrary detention in the context of migration and other human rights obligations of states concerning immigration detention. It aims to provide guidance to state members how to fulfill their obligations under the convention in the relation to the rights to liberty and protection against arbitrary detention of migrant workers and members of their families. The general comment also seeks to provide guidance to states on implementing the Global Compact for Migration, particularly its Objective 13, and to other stakeholders on implementing initiatives to promote and protect human rights and monitor compliance thereof. Article 16 of the Convention provides for the protection of the rights of liberty and security of all migrant workers and members of their families. States parties should therefore guarantee adequate conditions in detention centers, taking in consideration the individual circumstances and necessities of each detainee and ensuring that conditions of detention adhere to all relevant international standards. In addition to those rights, other interrelated rights include the prohibition of torture and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. The process guarantees principle of legality and human rights considerations should be provided. General comment number 5 reminded us on main principles which should be respected, and definitely we should keep that. The grounds of the deprivation of liberty of migrant workers and members of their families are diverse. The general comment, however, is focused solely on relevant reasons for deprivation of liberty related to immigration status and whether or not detention is a result of migrants' irregular entry or stay in the states of destination, transit, or return. The prohibition of arbitrary detention is absolute. It is non-derogable rule of customary international law or a just cogens norm. In the process of decision making, it is important to make arbitrary tests, which includes assessment of existence, legitimate objective, legality, necessity, and proportionality. The general comment, number 5, also contains explains of states parties' duties related to personal carrying out detention. Implementation of duties defined in the convention must be with full respect of principles of non-discrimination, non-criminalization of immigration, exceptionally of immigration detention, non-detention of migrant children, non-detention of persons in vulnerable situations. I'm using the opportunity to invite participants to use the general comment number 5, rights to liberty, freedom from arbitrary detention in their connection with other human rights in defining state policies, including also adoption of relevant legislation. I also would like to inform you that the committee has started drafting process of general comment on Convention on GCM because, as I said, there are so many dilemmas related to implementation obligations of Convention in context of GCM, having in mind that there is still very low level of ratification of Convention from states. Thank you so much on this opportunity to address you today, and I hope that you will have a successful continuation of this meeting.
Thank you very much, Dr. Timur, for taking us through so eloquently the content of the general comment. And again, for those of you in the room, if you'd like a copy, it's by the registration desk. And for others, it is, of course, available online. Thank you again. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Jitvipa Benjasil, who is Director of the Social Division, Department of International Organizations, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Government of Thailand. And we look forward to hearing from you, your experience as a champion country of the GCM on alternatives to detention. Please.
Well, thank you, Pierre, and good afternoon, speakers, participants, both in the room and for those attending or following the event online. Yes, I have a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. Of course, it's a great pleasure to join this event to launch the report on promoting alternative to detention in Asia Pacific region, which is the outcome of the joint efforts by various ATD related team under the UN Network for Migration. And it's interesting to read through, and I would read more in details. And of course, it's good initiative to map out the use of the alternative to detention in 19 countries in the Asia Pacific region, including in Thailand. I would like to also thank OSCHR for inviting me to give a presentation today on Thailand's progress in promoting alternative to detention for children at local, regional, and international levels, particularly considering that Thailand serves as one of the champion countries for the implementation of GCM Objective 13, which is to use the administrative detention of migrants only as last resort and to seek alternatives. Well, our previous speakers also mentioned, and also from firsthand experience and also from the study, the importance that we need to give to the vulnerabilities and specific needs that children in the context of migration have. We, for Thailand, give careful consideration on how we treat and take care of our migrant children, even for those that enter or stay illegally or undocumented migrant children ended up in Thailand. We have taken into consideration several studies, and I also will have to study more on the IDC latest report, which have shown that immigration detention can have long-lasting detrimental impacts on children's well-being, overall psychological health, and their developmental growth. And such factors, especially with the extended length of their detention, with different forms of family disruptions, can make migrant children becoming even more vulnerable. And separating children from their mother have shown also that it leads to the higher risk of children in having overall difficulties when they grow up in the long run and having emotional problems. So Now I move to the section which is about the Thai government commitment to ATD. Although it hasn't been that long since we have been implementing this policy and initiative related to ATD of children, we can confirm that we strongly believe ATD is an optimal solution to detention of children in immigration. And we strongly committed to promoting this practice at national, regional, and international levels. The idea of ATD in Thailand actually started when our Prime Minister made a pledge at the Leaders Summit on Refugee in 2016. Our Prime Minister announced to end immigration detention of refugee and asylum seeker children in Thailand at that meeting. And from that point onward, Thailand has developed the MOU for the implementation, which is on the determination of measures and approaches, alternatives to detention of children in immigration detention center. The MOU was signed between 7 relevant Thai agencies later on in 2019. The agencies involved are the Royal Thai Police. The Immigration Bureau is under the supervision of the Royal Thai Police, and the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Interior, and Ministry of Public Health, and Ministry of Education, as well as the Ministry of Labor. Now I move to the main guiding principle of the MOU and the SOPs developed under this MOU. First, the principle is for children not to be detained unless that they are absolute necessity, in which it would be a measure of last resort. This is in line with another major document mentioned by previous speakers, and also implemented with the shortest period possible. And decision-making process related to this, it needs to be based on the best interest of the child, and the child's opinion must also be taken into account. Number 3, children have the rights to adequate standard of living for the benefit of physical, intellectual, emotional, moral, and social development. These also need to be taken into account. Number 4, family-based care is the first priority. Previous speaker also mentioned many alternatives, and shelters either run by the public or private sector shall be a measure of last resort and implement in the shortest period possible. And number 5, in considering alternative care methods, both physical and psychological development of children needs to be taken into account, as well as the identification of durable solution for our children. And we were aware, especially for early childhood development, these are particularly important. 6, all related agencies shall operate in a manner that ensure children will receive appropriate protection and support. And all these principles are also being guided by the fact that Thailand have international obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which Thailand is a party to, and also we also party to its 3 optional protocols as well. For the International Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers, I must admit that Thailand is not yet a party to this convention, but I read through the general comment number 5 as distributed in front of the room, and I hope Thailand example offers some useful practical cases. Some of the content also is good reflection for our implementation, because we also have some challenges in implementation as well. Now I move to the implementation tools. Several tools have been used in the implementation of ATD in Thailand. First is the SOP, which was developed in 2020. This serves as guideline for relevant implementing agencies in following the MOU. And second, the Mother and Child Admission Center was also established in the Immigration Detention Center. This is to ensure that mother and children remain together, not separated, why they need to go through immigration procedure. And this is also to ensure that, well, we can actually respond to their specific needs during the period like pre-screening or pending referrals. Another tool is we established the multidisciplinary working group. They actually help determine, monitor, evaluate the implementation of ATD. They comprise officers from relevant agencies, Immigration Detention Centers, Ministry of Social Development and Human Security, representatives from UNHCR, UNICEF, and IOM has also taken part. And this working group, they takes crucial role in consider and propose measures, and also design the individual care plan for each child, and making sure that, well, we respond to their specific needs in each particular cases. We also set up the case management system, which is to put forward resolution for each individual case. We also, under this system, we have a case manager, usually coming from NGO, but appointed by the working group. The case manager is responsible for each particular case, the well-being of the person. They're in charge of providing case management service, and also offer the community-based alternative, which is intended to enable children to live in the community. They have a chance to learn about the culture. At the same time, they can also learn and obtain life skills by living in the real environment of our society and community. And also currently Ministry of Social Development and Human Security is also work in partnership with registered NGOs, including Host International Foundation Thailand, to support children and their family, particularly on the part of reintegration into society, and also in finding solution for them for each particular cases. Next section, I move to success challenge and way forward. It's been 3 years after the adoption of the MOU on ATD in Thailand. The short recap from our experience is that, well, so far over 300 children and parents have been provided with ATD. And in details, there are 209 children, 90 mothers, 23 fathers. And about half of them, they choose community-based alternative, while the other chose to remain in the institution care. A few take out in terms of with what we consider as a success is, I think we need political will and commitment, particularly at the top, at the leadership level. Since the pledge made by the PM at the Refugee Summit, we also have the leadership from the DPM in getting together relevant line agencies to sign the MOU, and then we develop the SOPs and make sure it's been implemented with concrete results. And another point is the whole of government and whole of society approach, as also mentioned by representative from IDC. Without engagement of all relevant agencies and working in partnership with partners, NGO, international organization, local community, ATD cannot be effectively implemented. Some of the challenges we face, of course, it involves limited resource capacity of the institutional care in certain area of the country. Also, in some cases, we find there are limited awareness, understanding of the procedure and workflows of relevant players, sometimes also officers. We try to make sure that we have enough training so everyone understands what's next and what's best to do. And also the case-related challenges. Some migrants don't have document. It's difficult to prove their age. Some migrant looks much older than their real age. So we deal with them differently, especially the adolescent groups. Also the language barriers, lack of knowledge for officers in certain area, and also the cultural sensitivity religious context of how to take care of each particular migrants. These, of course, are a problem in terms of implementation, delays in providing ATD in the best and most effective manner to certain cases. We're now in the process of doing a review of our implementation of the MOUs. This has been done in collaboration with UNICEF and International Detention Coalition. In general, despite many implementation challenges, we think that every little steps count, and it's crucial that we continue sharing our experience and learning from others, and also attending activities, including this platform, to learn and to make sure that we continue to make progress. Next, we move to the commitment at regional and international levels. At regional level, Thailand has also contributed to development of the ASEAN Declaration on the Rights of Children in the context of migration in 2019, and development of its plan of action, which was just introduced last year. One of the focus of this plan of action is on the accessibility to child protection system, key point that are already highlighted by previous speakers, and also including the giving priority to non-custodial community-based ATD over detention measures, and also ensuring the best interests of the child. And also, as one of the GCM champion countries, specifically on the issue of ATD, we've been sharing experience and best practices through various seminar activities. At the recent International Migration Review Forum in New York in May this year, we also co-organized a side event on ATD together with various countries, Portugal, Morocco, and also international organizations, including IOM, UNICEF, WHO, among other partners. And this is to raise the profile and also to advocate for more interest and implementation on the ATD and wider implementation. And to build up on our previous pledge made in 2016 at the Refugee Summit, we also announced the pledge at the IRMF, still on the implementation of ATD measures for migrant children, but to step up efforts on implementing it more effectively. And these are some of the examples that has shown that, well, Thailand's firm commitment in implementing ATD, and also sharing and learning from our colleagues, countries, and also international organizations and NGOs. So I think the key points are to make sure that, well, we have better protection of migrant children. We ensure that we respect the best interests of the child, and also better have the promotion and protection of the rights of children, including migrant children. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really honest and frank, I thought, appraisal of where Thailand has got to, and where you can take forward the commitment to ATD for children. And it's certainly something that is part of the good practices in the region, and is part of that dialogue that you have with your fellow GCM champion countries as well as others. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. We'll now hear from Bernard Sama, who is chair of the Asylum Seekers Support Trust from New Zealand, for his contribution. Please join.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. That is a greeting from the indigenous people of New Zealand. Just saluting you all who are here today and for those who are online. As Pierre has said, I am Bernard Summer, the chair of the Asylum Seeker Support Trust. I came to New Zealand, or I moved to New Zealand, getting confused now because I'm in Thailand. Yes. Sorry, I'll have to turn this table a little bit so I can be interactive with the PowerPoint, please, if that's all right. Yeah. Okay, I think that should be fine now. Yeah, I moved to New Zealand some 16 years ago as an asylum seeker, and I went through the refugee status determination process and was recognized as a refugee in New Zealand. And since then, I've been living in New Zealand until my longest flight was the one that I took to Thailand. And interestingly, the flight also that I took to New Zealand some 16 years ago was from Bangkok. So it's been a good start for me. And I really have been very excited to come here today to talk to you about my experience, first as someone from a lived experience as an asylum seeker, and then second as an advocate in the refugee community in New Zealand, as well as a researcher. So I sort of wear about 3 or 4 hats. I'll talk to the role of asylum seekers in civil society advocacy for humane alternative to immigration detention in New Zealand. And with that, I want to build from where Hayat spoke before, because he really emphasized that it really would be good to have people from lived experience play a more active role in this kind of work, given that it's a battle that is very, very tough. But I stand here today to speak also, which feels a bit unusual, but to speak in terms of what New Zealand has done, and are we speaking to the good things? That's why I said it's a bit unusual to have come from civil society, but we deserve to also say that it's good when they are doing good. Yes. So we could go to the next slide, please. All right. So that was just an overview. The next one, please. All right. New Zealand as a country is in a very unique position in the Asian Pacific region, given that it's very isolated from the rest of the world, even most of the Pacific region, as we can see on the map there, which is red. And what that means is that for countries like Thailand, for instance, or Australia that receive a large number of asylum seekers, I'm trying to avoid the echo on the mic, receive a large number of asylum seekers. New Zealand does not receive that number. We receive an average of about 367 claims or thereabouts for the past 10 years. But as a country, we do not have an immigration detention center, which is good. But the bad side for us as a country is that because we don't have that, which I pray we never ever have as a country, we instead have used criminal justice facilities. So for people who claim asylum, and there is a reason according to the law that, for instance, they may not have a proper identification or for other security reasons, and there is a need to detain them, they are actually put through what looks more like a criminal justice system. If it's during the weekend, they'll be detained in a police cell until Monday, where they'll be taken to court to see a judge, and then they go through what is called a warrant of commitment. That is a court order by a district court judge in New Zealand. And if granted, that will put them into prison. And the issue with that, okay, thank you. I was sorry, I was avoiding the mic because I was scared that the echo will get even more loud, but thank you. So the issue with the system in New Zealand is that when people are put in detention, that is in prison, there is no time limit. So it could be renewed and renewed and renewed forever. So it's sort of indefinite. So there have been cases where people have been there for 6 months, others, one case that was released during the COVID pandemic, he had been in prison for 3 years. But when he was released, he was recognized as a refugee because being outside made it possible for him to be able to establish his claim. But one thing to note about the system in New Zealand is that for majority of the people who had been detained are actually people that have come from Muslim background countries. So this is the aspect about us as a country that is not being good. So we'll move to the next slide, please. All right. In terms of what New Zealand has done, that's good, following, for instance, from the example from Thailand, is that in 2013, New Zealand made an offer to Australia to receive some of its asylum seekers that had been recognized, but still detained in offshore facilities. And for us as civil society, it was really a very good alternative to say that because Australia's intention had been stated quite clearly that these people will never get to Australia, and if they choose to remain in that situation, then they'll be detained forever. So this was sort of like a very good alternative for New Zealand to have stepped in that space and made that request. But because of other issues that were in place, given that in New Zealand, if you live in New Zealand and you have a New Zealand citizenship, or you live in Australia and have Australian permanent residence, you can easily move and live and work in either of the countries. So that became an obstacle that Australia could not accept the offer from New Zealand because they thought, or they saw that that would just be like a back door for the people that were coming from these islands to get into New Zealand and ultimately move to New Zealand, to move to Australia. But the good out of that is that finally this year, the Australian government accepted New Zealand's offer. And for the next 3 years, we expect that 450 people will be resettled to New Zealand from Nauru Island and from other immigration detention facilities in Australia. So each year, New Zealand will be taking 150 people through the UNHCR because we have a refugee resettlement program that already allows for 1,500 people to be resettled to New Zealand. So what that means is that these 450 will come out from that number. So, please, let's go to the next slide. And then again, still this year, New Zealand also announced that it would be abandoning the practice that it's done over 30 years plus, that is to detain asylum seekers in criminal justice facility. So this for us was a very big news because it's something that the civil societies have been advocating for over 30 years, and there had been no change to that. And following the announcement, the announcement was made in May, and then our borders were opened, I think in June or somewhere about there. And then following that, anybody who has come to New Zealand, claim asylum and meet that criteria that they could be detained, are now being sent to the Asylum Seekers Support Trust, where I am the chair of. So we see that good faith, where there is still a lot of work that needs to be done because the law itself that allows this sort of practice needs to be changed. And what we have been asking for is that it needs to be in line or conform to the UNHCR guidelines on detention. So 2012 or the current one. So we'll go next to the one, please. So besides that, another thing that New Zealand has done again this year, that is in July, which again, that's really echoes some positive energy from us, from the community, is that it's created a refugee advisory panel. So this comes from a work that's been done internationally, where people from refugee background are being asking that they need to be on the decision-making table. So for many years in New Zealand, we've never had that sort of conversation where there is actually a panel made up of people from refugee background. So we were very delighted that the New Zealand government has taken this initiative and is sort of leading us, one of the countries, to have this panel that is made from people from all the different backgrounds, the refugee background communities in New Zealand, including even former asylum seekers. So that is good. And please we'll go to the next slide. So yeah, that was just a picture there, sort of thinking about what we could, in terms of the role we have played as civil society and as lived experience people in civil society advocating for this change. And I've just listed before the sort of changes that New Zealand has brought, which has been good. But now let me speak a bit in terms of the activity that we've done as civil society to get to that point. In terms of ending detention, it's been a policy that has been in New Zealand since about 1989. One of the members of the Asylum Seeker Support Trust sort of put that to about 1989, and that's why the Asylum Seeker Support Trust was formed in New Zealand, was because New Zealand started detaining certain people who came to claim refugee as a result of war in the Middle East. And so since then, civil societies have been advocating for change, but it didn't quite work. Well, it never worked. I shouldn't say it didn't quite work. So in 2018, having come from the lived experience as an asylum seeker, fortunately for me, I was not detained, but I have very close friends and people also that I interviewed in the community for my research who were being through detention. So when I first did a master's thesis on the same refugee status determination, looking at the coping strategies. And when I listened to the stories that people told me, and I looked at my own story, one of the things that really triggered me was I needed to do a PhD sort of for research on not only just doing research that you put on the shelves and walk away, but do research that as part of the research process, I must commit to changing something. Because I felt like when I was talking to people that have been through this experience, one of them challenged me. Now I have told you my story. What are you going to do about it? And that was for my master's research. And because I am sort of the kind of person that gets around in the community, there was no way I could get away from that. Because I have to see this person again more often. So I decided then to subscribe to this paradigm of research, transformative paradigm, where I told myself that I'll do a PhD looking at New Zealand's refugee status determination process. I'm asking the question, how could it be made safer and better? And in the process of that, I will also do advocacy that I can demonstrate that I made an attempt to change something, even if it did not change. Fortunately, Amnesty International had done some work on this in the past. But one of the major issues with doing research with people from especially asylum seeking background is that it's always hard to get them to front up, to be able to speak to their experience for various reasons, because sometimes if you don't pick your words carefully, you could say things that might trigger, for instance, the immigration law in New Zealand allows the decision maker to revisit your claim, and they can cancel your claim even after you've been recognized and even have citizenship. So that becomes a very big challenge to be able to have people from this background to talk about their experience. But fortunately, coming from the community and having that trust, I was able to do this work. And when Amnesty heard about it, they became quite interested, knowing that they have someone that could be there to speak about the experience. And for me, what I found going through this journey is that initially Amnesty did some research, a report on that, and submitted to the government. And then the government, we went down to Wellington, had a meeting with the government, during which the government, what I found being in that meeting room is that having someone from lived experience in that environment made so much difference. Because for me, when I was speaking, it appeared to me that suddenly the people that make these decisions, they connected that the decisions they make actually affect human life. And there they have someone seated there talking about this experience, what prison has done to their community and all of that. And when we were leaving that room, they had already indicated to us that they will be abandoning this practice. And subsequently, they did their own review, because government has to follow its own processes, did its own review, and the finding from that review said the practice was arbitrary and discriminatory and does not conform to New Zealand's obligation to refugees. So then the government made the announcement that it will be abandoning the practice. So we are now at the stage of waiting for the implementation. Already asylum seekers are now being detained in prison, but what we would really like to see going forward is a law change, such that the next government, for instance, after the current government doesn't come and go back to the former practice. Unfortunately, time is an issue. I can go on and on, but I will have to just end it here to say that, like the other speakers have said, the role that civil society can play in this space, especially people from lived experience, is very, very impactful. Having someone there that is bold and courageous to speak to their experience can humanize what, for many policymakers, they often don't think these policies that they make is actually affecting human lives. I would like to use this opportunity then to thank the organizers, thank the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the IDC, and the UNHCR here in Thailand for the invitation and the opportunity for me to come here to talk to the room and to every other one that is online. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bernard. That was excellent, and it really made me, reflect on the importance of the human story, not just individual stories. Coming together to understand that policymaking is, of course, about human beings. But we're making this because we want to do better, as somebody on the panel said. So thank you very much for coming all this way to share your experience with us. To wrap up our panel, but last but not least, is Pepi Siddiq from the Regional Office of the IOM. She's the Senior Migrant Protection Specialist. And I invite you, Pepi, to come up and help us close off this excellent panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. As the last speaker, let me try to figure this out first. So that I'm not. I will be brief as the last speaker, and I think we're already a little bit over time, but I will take a few moments to talk about the Global Compact on Migration, as well as what we're doing here in the region with the UN migration networks and how that all links together and how that all comes to alternatives to detention and how we're trying to drive the agenda in this region. So just to reiterate, the Global Compact is the first ever intergovernmentally negotiated UN agreement. Maybe I actually move this back so that I can look at the audience, agreement on a common approach to managing international migration. And that really is quite a wonderful achievement, even if it came a bit late, because before that, there had been nothing really to govern this at a global stage. Governments traditionally see migration management as something that pertains very closely to national security issues. And so coming together at a global forum to discuss it, to be willing to commit to certain principles wasn't something that was easy to achieve by any chance. And I think in that light, also, when we talk about immigration detention and alternatives to it, we have to remember that immigration detention is a migration management tool used by the governments. And that's why within the context of the Global Compact, it's good that we think of it as one of those 23 principles that we're talking about. We have to think of it in light of also talking about drivers of irregular migration, pathways to regular migration, all the specific vulnerabilities that are out there, trafficking, exploitation, asylum seekers, and all of this has to be thought of together somewhat to make sense for the governments and for them to make these commitments. But of course, it's also wonderful that there's a specific objective, Objective 13, that really talks about alternatives to detention, what it needs to look like, and allows us in the future to hopefully also try to measure the change that we see in the world going towards those alternatives. This region did fairly well with regards to signing up to the Global Compact. Almost, most governments did. There are a few notable abstentions, Australia and Singapore, really. But we also had a large set of champion countries. Thailand, of course, was one of the major champions, but we also had Nepal, Indonesia, Philippines, Cambodia, and Bangladesh from this region alone saying that they wanted to be GCM champions. And Thailand, of course, it was great because Thailand specifically also said that they wanted to champion the alternatives to detention for children. So that was really, really positive to see from the region. We've heard about the importance of the civil society voices in ensuring that we can drive the agenda, move the needle on those 23 objectives. And it really is about the diverse stakeholders. I mean, it's a voluntary commitment to those objectives, and we have to renew that commitment on almost daily basis. We have to ensure that governments stay on track, and what better way to do that but work really closely together with civil society, with media, with migrants, with politicians, trade unions, to ensure that we can get there. At the regional level, so to sort of coordinate all of this and to ensure that there was a way for us to keep it on the agenda and to also look at kind of organizing ourselves at the regional level, there the network on migration, the UN network on migration was established both at the global level, but then also at the regional levels. So here at the Asia Pacific regional level, the regional network is convened by IOM Regional Director, who's the coordinator and secretariat of the UN network on migration for the Asia Pacific. And then we also have the executive committee in there, which has 11 UN agencies, maybe ILO, OHCHR, UNDP, UNICEF, ESCAP, to name a few, not all. There is a whole lot of coordination, of course, that comes with that. And it really needs that extra coordination also within the UN system to support states in implementing the GCMs, because of course, a lot of the UN organizations and agencies are doing their own work on migration. UNICEF is looking very closely at how that pertains to children. OHCHR is looking at it very strongly from the conventions and the rights, and ILO, of course, from labor convention sides. And we all look together at how we can support, for example, then the resident coordinators and the UN country teams and how they put their planning together and how they choose to support their government counterparts in turn. It can provide all sort of support from policy guidance. For example, this wonderful research that was done by IDC with the support of the Migration Network is hopefully something that we can take it to the country networks, take it to the resident coordinators and say, here is something that you can use and look at when you're working on alternatives to detention. Here at the regional level, we have 3 core work streams working on the UN Migration Network. The first one is to support the actual implementation of the GCM and all the work that goes with that and how to support the country levels, the resident coordinators. The second core work stream is really looking at joint advocacy and strengthening the voice of the network, how to keep the message alive. Core work stream 3 is then supporting the regional review of the implementation of the GCM. So looking a little bit also how we continue from the IMRF and how we take that to the regional level and how we continue ensuring that we're also sort of trying to ensure that things are changing as a result of all the work that's going on into this. During the IMRF review now, which was the global review, and the first coming together post GCM signing for the member states to look at what has happened so far, we received quite a lot of pledges from governments and civil society partners in terms of what they would like to do next. And again, this region did fairly well. There were 10 countries that pledged. I don't have the number, but I remember looking at the Excel spreadsheet, and it's a lot of different pledges in terms of how specifically they can take this forward. And there is a lot of thinking going on in the governments in the region around, for example, how to do national action plans on GCM implementation and how to work towards that. So there's a lot of space, I think, at the country level also under the GCM to look at how we can drive that agenda. I think with regards to post IMRF, oh, and of course, sorry, this is what I forgot to mention, but beyond the work streams, we also have two thematic work streams. And one of them is the Alternatives to Detention work stream, which happens here at the regional level. It's under the global work stream that also looks at alternatives to detention. And we are hoping that under this, we will start seeing some country-specific alternatives to detention work streams. We know that there's some discussion around this, for example, in Thailand already, that looks at then specifically how the UN system and the civil society could further support the government in its work towards providing alternatives to detention. And there's another work stream that looks at climate and migration as well in there. So post IMRF, let's see. Next steps, we will need to develop and adopt a set of indicators to actually measure progress towards the compact. So until now, it's been more about pledges, it's been about voluntary statements, it's been about countries identifying themselves as the champion countries. But really next, what needs to come is some sort of an indicator framework that says this is what we're looking at to measure how we're doing actually against those 23 objectives. We will organize a briefing for member states on the IMRF. Briefings also should be done at the regional level and then at selected countries. Hopefully continue working with country capacities, UNCT's governments on accelerating the GCM implementation at national levels, and then start with the regional reviews in 2024, as was mentioned by Pia as well. And then looking at mobilizing country networks. We have UN country networks in quite a few of the countries already in this region, but by all means not in all, and this is something that we would like to see pop up over the coming years to ensure that some of this coordinated work has a home also at the country level. With the ATD mapping report was produced to inform and support preparations for the IMRF, as well as to serve as a useful resource for post-IMRF implementation efforts in this region. And we really hope to be able to continue supporting the life of that and the use of it, and hopefully some change as a result of it through the regional, the national, whether UN country teams or UN migration networks, and very much supporting it from the ATD work stream and possibly also from the national level ATD work stream soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very helpful, I think. And of course, if there are any questions related to how we've organized ourselves within the UN system to support member states and stakeholders on GCM implementation, do please, raise your hand. In fact, Pep, you reminded me that under the Thailand country network, we do have actually established a work stream on ATD that is being co-chaired by IDC and OHCHR. So we hope to have more progress, and it would be good to see that replicated in other countries in the region, as indeed it would be good to see replicated more champion countries in our region. We've been slightly stagnant for some time after Asia Pacific got up to a very flying start. So it would be really important to see more countries come to the table and join Thailand and the other champion countries. So without further ado, I'm going to open the floor for any thoughts or questions. We have a little bit of time, and I'm going to read out one question that came to us from one of our online participants. and then come to all of you in the room. So get ready to ask your questions. The question is relating to Thailand, and it asks, what is Thailand's method on dealing with age differences? How do they decide on placement, especially if the individual looks like an adult? And I recall that you had mentioned this as a challenge, so maybe it's just a little bit more detail on that. Are there any other questions that any of you have in the room? Or very shortly, if some of you would like to share your experiences, your national experiences in relation to alternatives to detention, that would also be really appreciated. And of course, for those of our colleagues online, please do, we have with somebody monitoring the chat box. Can I maybe ask Ms. Benjasin if you would be able to take that question then while we reflect on others? Thank you.
Sure. Yes, of course, I'd be happy in the meantime to respond to the first question on age difference, how we deal with that. During my presentation, we also mentioned that, well, that's also one of the challenges that we face in terms of implementation. Some of the children that we face, they don't have document. Some looks older than the real age. So basically, it depends on the case as well. They came with the mother or the father. Normally with the mother, it's not that difficult to put them in the social development shelter, which usually take care of women and children. If they came with the father, then it poses challenges as well, because the shelter don't put adult men. So it is different. And at the same time, we also rely on our partners, UN agencies, international organizations that are familiar with a particular profile of a particular group of people from certain countries. They somehow can tell approximately their age that they think. And also they also have resource of translators that help interviewing them, and that also help in terms of telling their age. But of course, it is not like cut off at the age of 18 and they're not allowed at the shelter. Sometimes we do accommodating them, especially if they came with their mother. I hope that answers the question.
I'm sure it did. Thank you very much. That's useful to know and interesting to hear about a child protection lens on age assessments. We often hear some different experiences as well relating to that. So thank you very much. Do I have any takers for questions? Yes, please, the gentleman at the back.
Hello. My name is Rufino Seva, and I'm the project coordinator of the Urban Refugee Project in the Philippines. I was referring to what I've said, that support to national capacities. As you know, in the Philippines, it's very quiet regarding this alternative to detention, but there is an effort in the government of trying to realize this, but there is a need for some kind of engagement with the civil society or the NGO, so that this is actually, that it is actually being implemented. Because now we are the one monitoring an asylum seeker in the detention, neglected with their medical concerns, and the detention center is overcrowded with the Chinese and other nationalities. So I think there is really a need to work hard on the alternative to detention in the Philippines, and there are already indicators in some of the government's department circulars. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, for that question. Another gentleman here on that side.
Thanks very much. My name's Chris Eads. I am the Secretary General of the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. First of all, I just wanted to commend everyone involved with the report, and most importantly with this work. It's fantastic and is a great lesson for all of us. A question for the panel would be, it's fantastic to see people with lived experience, especially of immigration detention speaking at an event like this, and that's a really big change, and thank you for that. It's really instructive, really useful. The question that I have is, how do you use those experiences to influence advocacy of government officials across our region? How do you have a particular strategy for that? How does that work? Does it go beyond storytelling into practice? And how do you make those connections between the people with the lived experience and the people making the decisions? Because you clearly seem to have done it and done a really good job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to hand back to the panel. And what I'm going to do maybe is ask, oh, sorry, there's one more question at the back of the room, please. 1 second, please, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Jup. I'm from Refugee Rights Litigation Project. I'm based in Thailand. I think my question is about how maybe I want someone to share about the experience or the perspective from how the country can deal with the issue of national security, because I also heard from the panel that the GCM is a good mechanism or good thing that can fulfill the gap of the international national security. So my question is, like, we still see some children in the IDC, Immigration Detention Center, and especially those who may be considered as a group that concern the national security. If I mention like Rohingya or like North Korea, or people, some refugee from Myanmar, particularly from Thailand, as our organization is based in Bangkok, we still see some children inside the IDC. Just wonder, how do you think the ATD may be implemented to this group specifically? Thank you.
Thank you, brilliant. That were 3 very good questions. And if I could, as I said, go down the table and ask maybe if you could respond to the questions, and maybe also help us end with one recommendation you'd all have for, how you would advise to take this forward. And it could be to your own organizations, to your countries, to at the regional or international level, but really something maybe to inspire us to move forward. So Hayat, do you mind if I start with you, and then we'll go down the table? Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Chris for your question. I might just take Chris's question, and then the rest can answer their others. I think it's how you can influence government decision. I think what you just explained is storytelling, or explaining your first-hand experience is crucial, important, because often, politicians or government are also human beings like you and me, and bringing that story on the table that can change their perception, and also can change the policies and the laws. So I see clearly the importance of storytelling. Again, I'm stressing again, politicians are also human beings like me and you, and it's just sometimes it's the policy or the politics that maybe influence their perspective. But storytelling is important. But also going to events like this. You're talking to lobbying and talking to them, and also telling the impact and also the importance of the issue, and also impact of the issue on the person is also the other strategy that I would say is important. And then also, of course, meeting with the politicians, with the ministers, with people responsible basically for that particular sector. And yeah, I think those are the 2 things that came in mind. The recommendations that I have, again, I would just give here 2 if that's okay. So the first one is, again, the importance of the one I just said before, the importance of having alternative, or to be more blunt, to have a community-based alternative, which is very important. Again, benefits, many benefits. Being not putting more harm on people psychologically and also mentally, but also other benefits for the government themselves. And the other more important, crucial thing is for the governments, and we saw the champions, or some country champions were doing absolutely great job and on ending child detention or finding alternatives. The more crucial thing is to change the law. because we can talk the whole day, the whole night, let's do this, 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 this. But at the end of the day, what matters is for the governments to change the law. Because if you can talk, but if there is no change from the higher level, then I think talking doesn't help and doesn't do justice to the issue that we're talking about. So community-based is one, and the other thing is I think the changing of the law is more crucial. Thank you.
Those are two really important recommendations. Carolina, maybe I'll just pass on to Carolina. Thank you.
Thanks, Haya. I firstly would like to address Chris's question, which I think is a very, very good question. I think Hyatt is being ultra generous in talking about storytelling. Actually, I think we need to go well beyond storytelling. The lived experience leadership needs to be at the centers in terms of policy making. And lived experience leaders have so much to say about policy making. So I think it's very important that that this is not tokenistic. Like people with lived experience could not like that. That cannot be a tokenistic use of the fact that of telling a story. It's actually moving the policy, moving the framework, and being behind the design and the analysis. And I think there is this big misconception about seeing this advocacy as part of only storytelling. I think we could learn much more from putting people at the center and their voices at the center. In terms of IDC, very quickly, we're just developing our next strategic plan, and lived experience leadership is at the center of that. We also have a group of lived experience leaders of detention from different places, different parts of the world, and our international advisory committee, which we are also increasing the numbers and putting lived experience leadership at the center as well. So for us as an organization, this is something we are definitely taking very seriously in terms of how to move the agenda forward in terms of, this is an experience of an organization, but April has done a lot of that. So, yes, there are many NGOs that are doing very good things on this. And I think it should go, not for NGOs, but it should go across the board. This is the way we should all be pushing this agenda forward. In terms of recommendations, very, very quickly, firstly, center lived experience leadership, which is what I'm saying. Secondly, I think we need to use the momentum in terms of what is happening in the region. We have seen that there are good things coming through, and we need to build on that. And we need to, we need to build on firstly ending child immigration detention completely, and then expanding that, because it's not enough to end child immigration detention. We actually need to reduce detention and to be thinking about how do we end this practice that is actually not good for governments, it's not good for people, and there is a win-win solution. The alternatives to detention are a win-win solution for people and for governments. This helps also to link the national, the regional, and the global, and Thailand is a good example of that. I think for us, we have seen advocacy work in this way, and this whole of society, whole of government approach that we are seeing here in practice, really, working with the UN, with the government, civil society, etc. And lived experience leadership. And the last point is intersectionality, which I mentioned before. We need to think about how different people are affected by immigration detention and give that intersectional lens to everything we do.
Thank you, Carolina. And indeed, intersectionality brings us back to the understanding of why detention should be a measure of last resort, if ever. Thanks. Bernard, please.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for that question, and thank you, Katarina and Hayat. I'll just build on that to say that from my experience from New Zealand, it's finding people in lived societies and in lived society who understand how to hold a hand of someone from a refugee background, to put them on a table like this, to be able to talk. Because talking about lived experience can really be very challenging for a lot of people. They have to go back through their memories, but with the right support, many people can be able to do that. But more importantly, from what we've learned in New Zealand, is also finding someone within the government who is passionate about the rights of refugees. The changes that we've been able to achieve in New Zealand, the promise by the government to end detention, and the creation of the refugee panel and other, which I have not listed, it's because within the government, we had a minister, an associate minister, who was really passionate about the rights of refugees, that will listen to us and would tell us what to go and do and come back. And so we were doing the advocacy from outside, and he was also doing work from inside. And that led to the change that we are seeing now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's important. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Carolina, that the stories mustn't be tokenistic. It mustn't be just telling a story for the sake of it. But I think it's important to have that human face to policy, because people make policy, as you said very eloquently. And so having that connection to why particular policy is made is also really important. Please, you have the floor, Ms. Benjasi.
Thank you. First, I respond on the question on national security issue, because I'm from the government, so I think that that this question addressed to me. I think, well, of course, for Thailand, we have a large number of migrants. We're dealing with a lot of different groups, mixed flows, mixed profiles. So the key is with the management of different groups of migrants. They left the country for different reasons, economic reasons or other reasons. So we need to have good screening mechanism. We need to also at the same time manage them according to different profile effectively. For now, we only have alternative to detention only for children. There's also question asked if we should have alternative to detention for adults as well. But with the massive number of migrants and undocumented irregular status we have, we haven't come that far. We haven't reached that stage yet. I think it's a good question that you ask when we give importance to national security issue, but the whole concept of priorities are cross-cutting and interplay. We talk about development, the need of industry and market for workers. We also talk about obligation on to respect human rights and SDGs. Everything is cross-cutting. So I think we have to look at it holistically, involving many aspects and many dimensions. Some profiles might be much more difficult than others, of course, but working with partners at the same time, everything is not static or absolute. We also can work with partners, partner countries, international organizations, and some of the group we manage to find solutions and durable solutions for them, including resettlement in third countries. So it all depends. It's not like, well, once we face with the issue and we get stuck with the constraint or on the limitation that we have. Another point I also would like to join in discussing on the importance of having person with first-hand information to share their story. I think, well, on my part, as a mid-level government officers coming to platform like this for the first time, hearing first-hand experience, that's really impressive, and I think it offers many interesting point of view that is also useful for my work working in this particular area. And I think it's good to hear from the person and their story rather than reading from the studies and so many studies that we have to read too. And I also would like to highlight the importance of working on public sentiment, because I think the politicians, policymakers, they work in response to public sentiment. That sometimes they work on promoting film festival or providing many, multiplying impact on public sentiment and advocating stories of people who have faced the problem of or challenges in this area. And I think another area that we work according to GCM is on addressing stereotypes of migrants. And I think I also would like to here reiterate the importance of the role of the media with regard to the problem of stereotypes of migrants and misinformation on migration. On the way forward, I'm also keen and interested in learning about developing the indicators by the IOM, because of course, we one of the champions. It's not like we work on figures and targets. It's not champion. It's more like countries that want to do well. And I think it's good that, well, after aspiration and sharing experience, it's good to have something measurable And would be interesting how it coincides with SDGs, because for governments we work towards many indicators of SDG targets, and I wonder how the migration and migrant elements would factor in terms of cross-cutting or enabling other targets under the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to, and I really appreciated, your honesty at the idea that this is a complex issue, and we have to approach it together, that whole of society, whole of government approach. I did wanted to highlight as well, maybe Pepe will do that, to say that the Progress Declaration actually asked the United Nations Secretary General to produce a report with the indicators for the Global Compact for Migration. So that's something that we can, I think, all, draw from, as it will hopefully also draw from the experiences of member states as well as civil society. Pepe, please, you have the last word.
Thanks. I was recently at a regional event discussing the use of immigration detention with some of the regional governments, and a question was asked around, does alternatives to detention lead to moral hazard? And I think this is still a sentiment that's quite strongly felt by a lot of our government counterparts. And that's why I want to use my recommendation for the strengthening of the evidence base around both use of immigration detention and the alternatives to detention. And I think this is also one of the recommendations from the report, but we really need better data on immigration detention use in general, whether it's about gendered issues, cost to the government, conditions, the impact of the use of this on irregular migration, so that we have this and we can use it, whether it's with media or with government counterparts or however we want to use it, but to strengthen the arguments that we have on this. And then with regards to how do you open the door and ensure that the work that you've started on ATD can go beyond perhaps the children or the little bit that's permitted. I mean, it is often difficult because it falls on the security side of the government. And you're dealing with entities that have been working this way for decades, if not longer. And so you really, I think, again, it's the evidence base, and it's showing that something works and then building on that and having compelling arguments that can be backed by data. Thanks.
Really important point, and I'm not going to embellish that anymore. So I think that's a really good point to end on, and was the reason that collectively we decided to do this report. It really was the evidence base. We are almost exactly on time. We're 2 minutes over, and I'd like to thank our colleagues online for having the patience. I know we're all used to doing these meetings now, but it's spending a lot of time online is challenging. I'd like to thank all of you in the room for being with us in person. This is also a relatively new thing for all of us to be back together. So thank you for staying the course for the 2 hours. Again, please do read the report, read the general comments that have been mentioned and are available. We'd be very happy, any of us here is very happy to respond to any questions or comments you have. And finally, I'd just like to thank our expert panelists. It's been amazing to listen to you and hear from you. Thank you all for being with us today. And we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you very much.